Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Numenera Discovery WUBRG Season 1 campaign that I am currently running with the gold player. And I'm telling you the story of what happens in that campaign. And so basically at this point, Blackout has left Onyx Sanctuary, moved out of the mountainous area where the Cleft live, which he did not encounter any of the Cleft there, and then moved into the forest area where the Bramble live. So he's traveling along, and he has a backpack, and in that backpack he has some ciphers which he started with, and these ciphers came out of the Onyx Sanctuary. One of them is a gravity nullifier, and then also he has an ability which is thermal vision, right? And he is human. He knows that he is human, but he also knows that he's been modified because he has this thermal vision, but he doesn't know exactly how that modification has happened to him, right? And he has this, this rucksack, this backpack that he's carrying, and in there he has spheres of food and spheres of water, all which were replenished at the Onyx Sanctuary. And then he also has a machine cipher, which allows him to control a machine if he can get close to it and attach this device to it, right? So he has these two ciphers, and he's traveling along, and he goes into the forest area, and he's moving along, and there's trees about every 30 or 40 feet. He's in a lightly forested area, and he hears kind of a clank, a metal clank, right? And so he rolls to, he rolls his perception, and he's able, and actually it's a task of identifying what is close to him, right? Perception is, so he makes it, he's actually trained, right? Which means that it lowers the target number by 3, okay? And so, rolling on a d20, if he would need to get a 12, if you're trained, you would just need to get a 9, right, on Numenera. So, and so basically, and he's not surprised. He's able to counter this creature that's sneaking up on him, and he finds that there's a 9-foot Cybersnake. So there's this large snake, right? It's about as large as like a constrictor, but it does have fangs, and it's clearly inorganic, so it's robotic, right? So it's in the shape of a large 9-foot snake, but it's robotic, okay? And this thing, kind of and actually, I'm sorry. When he comes across this thing, he finds that it is already, he encounters his first, before he finds the snake. Sorry about this. Back up a little bit. Before he finds a snake, he finds a bramble, okay? Now, a bramble is essentially a living tree, okay? And the brambles live in the forested area. They're 6 feet tall. They're exactly the same size as a human. They're medium in Dungeons & Dragons speak, right? And they're just a humanoid size, and they have 2 arms, 2 legs, head, ears, eyes, but they're made out of wood, right? They're living trees, right? So with that said, he comes across this bramble, but it's dead. It's crushed, okay? And it's been crushed by something, and then he hears this snake. So actually, when the snake appears, he knows exactly what happened to the bramble. So this snake came across a bramble before Blackout came along, and it snuck up on the bramble, and it crushed him, right? It crushed him with his, just like a constrictor would crush him, and just left him in pieces right there in the forest, right? So, so basically, Blackout is now faced by this creature, right? So this robotic 9-foot constrictor snake, right? So, and at that point, he has 2 weapons. He has a rapier and he has a crossbow. Okay, so he takes out his he takes out his rapier, and he attempts to strike the snake, and he misses. The snake comes in and attempts to strike him and misses him. So I was very proud of the gold player for this, and he said, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that gravity nullifier cipher out, right? And I'm going to attach it to the snake, right? And then I'm going to have it lift the snake up into the air. And I'm like, that's an awesome idea, right? And so I make him make a roll for it. So he has to make he has to make a like an agility test, right? But again, the attributes in Numenera are might, speed, and intellect. So he has to make a speed check. He does use effort on this, so he spends 3 points from his speed pool. Every time you use effort, you spend 3 points from your speed pool, minus your edge, okay? And you can only do it a number of times that you have tiers, okay? And he's at tier 1, okay? So so basically he makes the roll, and I explain to him what happens, and he actually dumps this cipher literally into the creature, right? And what the cipher does is it raises up anything that is light enough to 30 feet in the air, and it does that every round. It can lift something 30 feet in the air every round. That is essentially the size of a human. Now the snake is about 2 or 3 times larger than a human. And so what I did was I just said, well, it's going to lift it up 10 feet each round. So he gets this thing down its throat, and then he rolls, out of the way, and then the snake just just shoots up into the sky, right? And he says, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for the cipher to turn off, and then that snake is going to fall down, and it will smash, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what will happen, right? So while he's waiting for the snake to fall down so he can get his cipher back, right? And by the way, let's talk about ciphers for a minute. This is interesting. So first of all, the cipher system is essentially, I love this. I think this is, again, it's much better than treasures handled in Magic, in Dungeons and Dragons, right? And in Magic the Gathering, but which are both canon to each other. There's no difference between Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. They're one IP, one product, one thing, one world, one multiverse. It's the same, right? So basically, these basically treasure in the cipher system, and Numenera is a world within the cipher system, right? So the cipher system is Monty Cook's rule system, and then Numenera runs on the cipher system. Now this gets it complicated because the Numenera actually prefaced the cipher system. They made Numenera with the rule system, then pulled the rule system out and made cipher system. They pulled Numenera. They made Numenera. It had the rules in it, and then they pulled them out to make a GURPS type, super rule system that will run anything. So they did do it backwards, right? Which is fine. I think that's a perfectly acceptable way to launch a rule system. Nothing wrong with that. Just thought it was interesting. But treasure, when you get treasure in Numenera, if it's a cipher, ciphers don't last, right? So they last a certain amount of time. It might be a single pill. It might be a wearable, right? Now, what gets interesting is, I read the book, but it was not super clear. Like, I think they were kind of like, the dungeon master will determine how these things work. And so basically the idea is you want to give the player characters these ciphers, but they're not permanent. They're gonna it's like a 1d6 try. So basically it's a little confusing. I found it very confusing. And please correct me if you know the actual answer for Numenera Discovery, because it wasn't super. I could tell that ciphers were not supposed to be permanent treasure, right? It's supposed to be one use or a few uses, right? The other thing, though, is because of the structure of Numenera, they're like, well, this could be a pill or it could be a wearable. And I'm like, well, what determines which, right? And I think, from my read of the rules, the dungeon master just decides it. So the way we're working with ciphers in my system is your first use is free. it always works. You get one use, right? After that, at any time, I, the dungeon master, can say, okay, roll a 1d4, and you're no longer gonna have this cipher after you've used it that number of times more. Now, the other thing is, like, let's say it's a really minor cipher, right? Oh, and here's another one. The game's like, oh, you can only attune 2 or 3 of these. I'm like, that's junk. I don't even like attunement in D&D. Like, you can get ciphers are tiny. You should be able to carry like 30 of them in your backpack. I don't deal with attunement in Dungeons & Dragons, and I don't deal with attunement in Numenera. I think that's silly. I don't think there's any reason for that. Nobody's going to just chuck a piece of treasure. That doesn't make any sense, right? So, yeah. So and then that's a bigger discussion. Let's keep moving. All right. So basically, he uses his cipher, and then also, what then happens is that while he's waiting for the snake, he goes over and he starts to look at the Bramble's body, right? And I said, the Bramble's body is in all these parts, and you find, its leg, its arm, its, the half of its torso, but you also find its heart, right? And the moment you grab its heart, your pools, right? Your speed pool, which you've used, starts to refill. So these hearts are filled with a magical energy, right? A healing energy, right? And so I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to take, its heart with you? And he's like, well, no, I'm going to pull the Bramble back together, right? And I'm like, wait, are you going to put its heart in the center of its chest and actually reassemble its corpse? And he's like, yes, right? And I'm like, okay. Now, I want to explain something, right? So one, if you go over to Matthew Colville's channel, MCDM, I did not know this, but he explained that that Dungeons and Dragons with one Dungeon Master and one Dragon Master, it has a special name. It's called Duet Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I've reached that point with the Gold Player. We're on our 4th campaign. We know that there's going to be a powerful narrative out of this, so we've learned to trust one another, right? So one of the things I said was, what I really want this campaign to be about is you exploring the Numenera world and getting to know these 5 species: the Bramble, the Cleft, the Smoke, the Visk, and and the Awakened Animals, right? And so at this point, I said, you're putting this Bramble's heart in the center of it. That may resurrect it, but I don't know. And what we're gonna do is, we're going to roll, right? You're going to take a 1d8. And first of all, Dungeon Masters never roll when they're running Numenera, okay? The Dungeon Master doesn't roll for Numenera. It only the player rolls, right? So only the Dragon Master rolls. So I said, pick up a 1d8, roll that 1d8. 1 through 7, this does not resurrect this Bramble. But if you hit an 8, this will resurrect every Bramble. Brambles they can be torn apart, but as long as they're reformed around their heart, they will actually resurrect, right? Guess what? Sure enough, he rolled an 8, right? So that was a truth, an iron sworn truth written directly into the narrative. Powerful. I was very blown away. I really loved this. This was extremely cool, and I absolutely loved it, right? Very, very cool. And I was just really thrilled with how this went, right? All right. So at this point, the Bramble resurrects, and then and this is all happening while the snake is floating up in the sky, because it's taken a long time for it to float all the way up in the sky, and then it's going to come back down, right? And he pulled it away so that it's not going to come down and kill them, but actually fall down. But when that cipher turns off, it's going to fall, and the fall is definitely going to kill it, right? The robotic snake. So at this point, Blackout resurrects this Bramble. Bramble, gets up, gets startled, has the whole startled scene. Oh my goodness, what's, am I alive? Blah, 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 right? And Aram, and then finally when he settles down, he introduces himself and says, I'm Aram, I'm a Bramble, and and he's like, welcome to our forest, right? And then at that point, Blackout says, hey, listen, there's a robotic snake that killed you and is about to fall down. The snake falls down, and then get this, right? So now this snake falls down, and essentially we split the snake up into ciphers, right? So one, he is able to take two, and the snake falls apart. He gathers his cipher back up. Blackout gets his cipher back, but then he also gets 2 plates of armor from this. 2 plates of armor from the from the robotic snake, right? Like plates that were not, crumpled. And so he has, 2 pieces of armor. Now he can't use this armor because he's a Jack, right? And Jack's, just like a regular Dungeons & Dragons rogue, you can't be going around in plate mail saying I'm a rogue, right? Same thing here. He also gets he gets the venom sacks, which I made detonation acid bombs. So he's got like 3 detonation acid bombs, and I think that was everything he got from the snake. And then he says, and then he makes friends with Aram, and then Aram takes him to the Bramble, home. And the Bramble home is exactly like the Ewoks have, like a city in the trees, right? And he meets the Bramble's council, and there are 5 counselors among the Brambles. And the one thing he realizes that the Brambles, they're the actual citizens of the Tree City, don't actually talk directly to the leaders. The leaders talk amongst themselves, and then the citizens talk amongst themselves, and there's really no direct communication between the two. They communicate in other ways. He also finds out that the Brambles are able to communicate with, that the Brambles are split up by what trees they originate from: oak, spruce, teak, right? And he's dealing with the oak Brambles, and they can communicate with each other through the roots of the trees that actually extend all the way to other tree cities within the forest area. So and he makes friends with the Brambles, and is able and sets the Brambles as an ally to himself. I'm going to cut it off there. Thank you so much for letting me share this story with you. I love tabletop role-playing games so much, and this is among Dungeons & Dragons' greatest competitors because it's written by a Dungeons & Dragons designer, Monty Cook. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion on Numenera WUBRG campaign. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.